check as we get going. You guys who are just tuning in, you can see, if you're on a desktop, you can see a chat box that's down in the lower right-hand corner. Any of you who are on a mobile device, I think you have to switch between screens. You can jump in between the video, see my wonderful face, or you can put a, switch over to the PowerPoint, just listen to the dulcet tones. How are we for sound and video out there? Check, 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 check. Always happy to have everyone here. As you get tuned in, let's see if we can get everyone to chat in where they're tuning in from. It's always interesting to see where everyone is, where you're tuning in from. So please feel free to chat in where you are tuning in from. I'll try to give you a shout out. We've got Florida, Ohio, Tennessee, Michigan, Missouri, California, Texas, Philadelphia, Richland, Utah, Japan, New York, New Hampshire, Georgia. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. As maybe you guys don't know this about me, but I'm broadcasting from the lovely state of Idaho. Any of you who've ever been to Idaho before know that it's on your way to Yellowstone National Park, and other than that, there's really not, there's so many wonderful reasons to visit, but it's really just on the way to Yellowstone National Park. So anyway, you guys, I've traveled a lot around the United States. I've spent some time with students across the country, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about your NPTE Performance Feedback Report and how the scoring system on the NPTE is created, used, implemented, all of that. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. Just as a quick note here, I wanted to just point out that I've got a Facebook group trying to get together. If you guys want to head over to Facebook and join our Facebook group, NPTE Resources, where I'll be posting practice questions, tips, tricks, all the things, all totally free. You guys can head over there and join into our Facebook group. So I'd really appreciate that. And then at the end of the session today, obviously I want to talk a little bit about PT Final Exam and who we are and what kind of courses we run. And I don't want to save all of that for the end. And so just as a brief note, PT Final Exam, we've been in business for I started about 7 years ago and had a lot of fun helping people get through the NPTE. So just as something to keep in the back of your mind, we're just starting up our July cohort. So if you're preparing for the July NPTE, we're starting that up on May 13th officially. But I've got a couple of sessions I want to get in before then. I like to think of it as a football season, kind of. Not that I watch a ton of football, but we've got the preseason webinars, the regular season webinars, and we've also got our postseason webinars. So we've got tons of great stuff coming for you. We're also the highest rated NPTE prep program on the web. Everyone else just has a couple of testimonials of their mother and all their friends. We take actual reviews, much like what you'd see on Amazon. Plus, did I mention we're about half the cost of some of the other guys out there? So bless their hearts, we do really good, have twice the content at half the price. So there's your little pitch. So the NPTE, let's talk about the score. So everyone who is here, you guys are all targeting the NPTE one way or the other. And there's a bunch of you here who have taken the exam before. There are a bunch of you who are just preparing to take it for your first time, and I want to speak to both of those audiences really well. So on the exam, the National Physical Therapy Examination for physical therapists, there are 250 questions on the test. Now, it's important to remember, though, that only 200 of those are actually scored. And so you can see that what they call the 50 pre-test items. And by pre-test items, it means it's their way of developing test questions in a test environment, but without, what do you want to say? They're testing them out in a real-life situation so they can see if they're valid or not to roll out actually on the test to be scored and to be used to give someone a license. And so some people erroneously think that they're all grouped together or that they have, big chunks of them all together. They're not. They're totally interspersed throughout. On the PT exam, you have 5 sections, and you have 10 of these pretest items interspersed in the 5 sections, and it's totally randomized. So again, you have no way to tell which ones are scored and which ones are not scored. For the PTA exam, it's similar. There are 200 items, only 150 of those are scored, and 50 of those are pretest items. And so I know we always get a bunch of PTA students as well, and I want to make sure that we put things in the right context for them as well. There's lots of carryover between the two types, or the two exams. So let's talk about the scoring on the NPTE. Okay, so there's the nebulous 600 out of 800 scale score. Now, I've been to the FSBPT headquarters on 2 separate occasions for their NPTE training. This is a training they do for educators on a yearly basis, and it's all about how the NPTE is created, scored, implemented, everything, how the scores are distributed, how they determine eligibility, everything from this FSBPT training. And not very many people have been to that, and it's important to recognize that there are some nuances to the score that you get on the NPTE. They use something called item response theory, and I'm going to talk about that in another free webinar I'll have this next week, where we talk about the actual mechanics of the questions and the test itself. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds here. But they use something called item response theory. And item response theory is essentially a way of gauging the performance of a candidate across different forms of the exam. So on any given test day, there are somewhere between 5 and 10, maybe even up to 15 different forms of the exam. What that means that each exam is slightly different. I mean, even if they control for the number of questions in each category, each exam will have some inherent differences. So therefore, rather than just rely on the raw score, they rely on something called the scaled score, or essentially something that makes equivalent all the different performances on all the different forms that day. So what it means is that if you're taking the NPTE in the Prometric Center right next to your buddy who's also taking the NPTE, you would be taking the same exam but two different forms of the exam, meaning every question would be entirely separate, distinct, and different. And it's all to prevent cheating. That's the whole idea, is to try to reduce and prevent cheating. So the raw passing score is usually somewhere around that 140 mark. I've seen it as low as into the low 130s. I've seen it over the 140s. There's not any one exact raw passing mark that's global because each exam form is different. So anyone who's out there saying that they know exactly what the raw score is for every test, it's just not possible, because there are about 10 different forms of the exam, and they have some wiggle room between each of them. But the bottom line is that it's somewhere around that 140 mark. It doesn't deviate too much. A lot of people ask me what the target score should be on your practice exams. Target score should really be about 75%. And honestly, I tell people that as long as you're trending above 70% on your practice exams, that's usually a really good indicator that you've hit that border and you're starting to come above that border significantly. That being said, there are certainly exceptions to the rule. And I always talk about the PEAT examinations, if you guys are familiar with the Practice Examination and Assessment Tool. The Practice Examination and Assessment Tool, it's the one that's put out by the FSBP and is an actual retired form of the exam. So people actually got their license based on that exam. So it has the highest correlative value or predictive value for your performance on the actual exam day. And I have had people who take the PEATs and pass the PEATs but fail the NPTE, but I've had all people the other way around where they fail the PEATs and pass the NPTE. Honestly, a lot of it comes down to how you approach those PEAT exams. If you're taking them as if it was the real deal, and meaning that you're not looking up answers, you're using the appropriate amount of time, you're in a similar environment. But generally, general rule, I tell people target above 70% on your practice tests and you'll be doing really good. Now, most people will say that the Therapy Ed tests, the ones put out by O'Sullivan and Therapy Ed, are slightly harder than the actual exam, or at least the scores tend to trend that way. And the score builders might be slightly easier, but again, those are just broad trends. Same thing for PT final exam. Our exam is typically slightly harder than the actual exam, at least by all the data we've been able to gather from students over the time. Anyway, point is, target 70%, passing score is usually around 140, and that's what gets you the scale score. The other thing about the scale score is that an 800 doesn't mean you got every question right. 800 out of 800 means you got about 92%, so you got an A on the test, which is great. And the reason they make that distinction is that the FSBPT, once you get high enough in the score, they just don't care anymore. They'll just say, yeah, 800 out of 800, yeah, go on, get to work. You did great. So it's really focused in on that 140 mark, or that 600 out of 800. So if a person gets a 590, it doesn't mean they were just 2 questions away. It means they are a few questions away, but it's not an exact 4 points per question sort of a thing. So bottom line, target above 70% and you'll be in really good shape. Oh, by the way, we've got Arunima who's helping us out. Arunima is one of our chat box specialists over at PT Final Exam, also a lecturer extraordinaire. And so if you dive in with us over at PT Final Exam, you'll likely get to interact with Arunima, who's fantastic. She took the class a little, how many years? 3 years ago, and has been helping us out ever since. Fantastic physical therapist. So Arunima, thank you so much for being there. All right, so there's the other question, and again, I don't want to get too much into this today because I'll be talking about it next week sometime. But the FSBPT publishes the material that will be tested on the exam. So they publish this content outline. And Arunima or anyone else, if you don't mind, head over or do a quick Google search for the FSBPT content outline. It was last updated in 2018, January 2018. And the test changes a little bit each year, but it really only changes significantly every 5 years. So we just went through our last update at the first of 2018, and we're not due for another update until 2023, which is, you know, coming just around the corner, but not too far. Well, I guess it's a little ways around the corner, but anyway, so the content outline is updated every 5 years significantly. And every year they may make some minor updates. Like, for instance, the blood pressure guidelines were tweaked and modified slightly. There was also some change in the nomenclature for pressure ulcers and talking about pressure injuries rather than pressure ulcers. Anyway, extremely minor as far as the semantics go. And so the major updates are only every 5 years. And this last one was really a fairly minor update as compared to the one in 2013. But if you look on the content outline, you'll find that the big three systems are the ones that have the most representation. So if we mark over here on the side, we've got cardio, musculo, and neuro are the most heavily represented on the exam. And you can see that by just by proportion, they really have, it's close to 75% of the exam just in those big three categories. So this is what I tell people all the time, is yes, the other systems are important. I mean, certainly we want to say that they are very important. Yes, the non-systems is important, and it's certainly important to get through all that. However, you need to be spending a bulk of your time where the bulk of the test items are, and that's in cardio, musculo, and neuro. And you can see that on these sections, especially musculo, differential diagnosis and interventions, probably the highest represented sections on the exam. Well, I guess it's kind of a toss-up between examination, evaluation, and interventions. So be sure that you're spending lots of time in the musculo, cardio, and neuro sections. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't ignore the other sections, but if you look down here at the GI and the lymphatic system, I like how the range starts at 0. So there could be 0 questions on gastrointestinal examination. And that's just simply because we're not gastrointestinal specialists. We are musculoskeletal specialists. And so therefore, most of our effort and questions is in the big three category. Now, the other thing I want to point out down here is the non-systems. So a lot of people get hung up on non-systems, and non-systems is an important section. There's about 30 items in the non-systems if you go look at it, and it crosses quite a spectrum from research and evidence-based practice all the way up to equipment, devices, technologies, modalities. All of those items certainly are tested, but only in a very small proportion, somewhere around 5 questions for each section. So again, a lot of people, if I had a nickel for every time someone asked me about a good resource for the non-systems, I'd have a lot of nickels. So I actually do have a mini series about the non-systems. It's all included in all of our courses, or you can buy it standalone. If you want to find the link to that, I can send it to you afterward. But the non-systems is important, but not worth spending the time on at the expense of the big three systems. So hope I'm being clear there that you can't ignore these things. However, it is important to study proportionately. And so, in fact, well, I guess non-systems is starting to bump up close to the cardio system. So, I don't know. What do you want to say? Non-systems, cardio, musculo, and neuro are probably they certainly are the most represented, versus the lymphatic, genitourinary, gastro, and metabolic, endocrine, and system interactions. All right, so let's talk about performance feedback reports. Now, I know there are some of you here who have taken the exam, and there are some of you who haven't. So again, trying to talk in that light. But the performance feedback report is an item or report that is available for purchase after you have taken the exam, and if you want to see how you did and break it down by section. So thus, it was important for us to talk about what the content outline is, because now as we look at some performance feedback reports, you'll be able to see that in context. All right, so looking at this first one, this person took the exam back February. They scored a 121 items on their raw score, and the scale score was 551. So you can see that there. And if you look at it, they try to break everything down by bar graph here, meaning the statistical likelihood of if you were to retake the test that day, what would your score be? And that's what this retake range is. That's all done with a confidence level, as you can see in that box and whisker plot. All right, so as we come down here into this person's performance, you can see it broken down quite nicely here in the visual format, that the examination and evaluation differential diagnosis were the worst sections, and you see that marked or delineated here by red. Non-systems, they did fairly well, but again, non-systems, there's not that many questions, so they got 17 items correct, and to pass the test, they only had to get 2 more questions correct in order to pass. Now, this is an important distinction to make. On the exam, you don't have to pass every section to pass the test. You just have to pass globally. However, in this score report, they break it down by section as if each section, it's not as if you had to pass each section in order to pass the exam. However, they try to point out what would be the minimum improvement required in order to get every system over that passing mark. So you can see that even though non-systems was technically below it's in the 550s, even though it was below that, they only had to get 2 more questions right. And again, it's just because it's a smaller section. Versus if we look at the musculoskeletal system, which is over here, and I know this is really small for a lot of you, they had to get another 5 questions correct in the musculo to bring musculo over the top or to get up to the passing mark. So you can see that the big 3 systems are the ones that needed the help here. Between cardio, musculo, and neuro, those are the ones that needed the most help. Integumentary and lymphatic did pretty good, and then other systems, again, right there on the edge. I think if they only got 1 more question right in other systems, they'd be doing pretty good. And then you can see here, they break the score down by section as well. So there's 5 sections on the PTA exam. You can see they had a very consistent effort, all except for section 4, which was a small aberrance. But again, it's only off or only different by a few questions. Instead of answering 23 correctly, they got 29 correct. And so they had a really good performance in section 4, but other than that, they were really very consistent. And please feel free to jump in with any questions along the way. If there's a point or at any point where you've got a question, please feel free to jump in. I've got a bunch of these score reports. I want to go through just some and point out some of the items that will be helpful to you as you prepare for your exam attempt, just to make sure that one, that you're preparing adequately, and 2, that you are not making some of the mistakes that sometimes we see. All right, so this is another person, they had a 583 on the exam, and you can see they really did quite consistent and very close to the mark. So they scored 128 correct, really only needed a few more questions correct in order to get over the top of the exam. Same thing here, if they only got 3 more questions correct in the non-systems, that would have put them right over that passing mark. And so then we come to each body system. Integumentary and lymphatic, again, it looks bad because it's in the red, but really only a few more questions in the integumentary and lymphatic systems would have made all the difference in the world. So we come down here. I think this is the real kicker on this score report, that section 1 was quite significantly lower than some of the other sections. So they only got 23 correct, when on the other ones they were pushing up near 30 correct. And so a lot of times that section 1, I see section 1, section 3, and section 5 as common problematic sections. And what I mean by that is section 1 is usually due to test anxiety. You get into the test, not sure, you just kind of start hyperventilating, seeing double, having troubles focusing for the test. Section 3 is where you come in after a break, and you can have that same test anxiety, hard to get back into the exam. And section 5, that's due to test fatigue. And again, that's just from timing and the fatigue of taking a high-stakes exam like this for so long. I mean, it's 5 hours to sit there and focus for all you're worth. It's the same reason why if you go on a long car trip and you've been driving a long time, and you get there, you're so exhausted, but it's because you've had such hyper focus for so long. So it's important. I do recommend that people who have troubles on that 5th section take mini mental breaks. And what I mean by that is just where you pause for a moment, take 2 or 3 deep breaths, close your eyes, regroup, and then dive back into the exam again. So this person, they had troubles with section 1, and if they had gotten section 1, had nailed section 1, I think they would have passed the exam. They would have been right there on the border. So point is that once you get into exam, try to take a couple deep breaths, calm the anxiety down, and dive into the exam without, hopefully without losing a exam section like this, and you'll see some significant improvement. Plus, if you look at this person, again, really pretty good performance across all the systems. And so as far as study strategy for the next attempt, 1 will be certainly controlling anxiety, and number 2 will be to just bump up your knowledge in each of the key categories. I mean, if you just give yourself a little more margin in those key categories, you'll be way over the top. All right, another exam report. This one, again, not very far away. They had a 576. And again, I want to point out that if you look at the neuro system, the neurovascular and nervous system, the other systems, and section 2 are the ones that had the most trouble. Now, section 2 is kind of a mixed bag because it's not really that first initial test anxiety when you get in the test, nor is it test fatigue at the end of the test. It can sometimes just be from losing focus. And so you can see, again, that significant aberrance there in section 2, which takes them down. And they're really not very far away from passing. Again, improving that section, keeping the focus and concentration in, and then bumping up their knowledge in a couple of the key areas, especially neuro, will result in a really good performance on the next attempt. All right, so this one here, this one, again, a little bit farther away, so they got a 561. You can see the interventions were the problematic part on this particular exam, this person's exam. Now, I get a lot of questions about interventions. Say, Will, how do I improve the interventions on the exam? So interventions is kind of a big grab bag of terms, or there are lots of interventions. Because if you go from cardiovascular to neuro to musculo, all of those interventions to wound care, therapeutic modalities, all of the, that fits more into the non-systems, but still interventions can involve all of those things, and it changes with each particular treatment. So I've been a physical therapist since 11, so where are we at? 8 years now that I've been a practicing physical therapist. And with each intervention, each particular treatment, the intervention changes each time to match the patient, that even if it's the same patient, as the patient improves and grows over time, you'll find that your interventions need to change. So therefore, the intervention section on the exam can be quite varied and is kind of frustrating to study for, just because it is so variable. So therefore, my biggest advice on the interventions section of the exam is to spend lots of time in the examination section of the exam. So I know that sounds maybe just a little bit funny, but the better you understand the conditions and the diagnoses, the more you understand those diagnoses and the injuries and the illnesses that we treat as physical therapists, the better you understand those, the better you'll understand the interventions in order to fix those. And so as physical therapists, this is our classic mindset, is that we test, we treat, we retest. We use standardized measures, we do a thorough examination, we find or make a list of problems that the person has that we can correct, and then we work on improving those problems with therapeutic interventions, and then follow that up by retesting to see if we were effective in our treatment. So therefore, The better understanding you have of the condition, the better you'll understand the intervention. So a great example here is meniscal repairs. I like bringing up the distinction between meniscectomies and meniscal repairs. So if you all recall, a partial meniscectomy is where you have a removal or a debridement of a meniscus, either medial, lateral, or both. And there's not really a precaution. I mean, there's certainly, what do you want to say? It is post-operative, and so you need to be sure not to soak the wound. You want to make sure they don't get an infection, all of that sort of thing. There's not a weight-bearing precaution that's associated with meniscectomies versus meniscus repairs. If you look at all the protocols related to meniscal repairs, you'll see that the meniscal repair requires more non-weight-bearing time. In fact, typically they're non-weight-bearing or at most toe touch or partial weight-bearing all the way for 6 weeks, while that meniscus that they repaired, they're trying to get that to heal in place and the scar in place. And as you understand, the meniscus is, at least the intersection of it is avascular, or has very little vascular supply. So therefore, the healing process is different and is prolonged on that meniscus. So therefore, your intervention on a meniscal repair would be geared towards what? You'd be geared towards doing straight leg type activities in a non-weight bearing setting versus a meniscectomy. You would do weight bearing as tolerated, and as the weeks progressed, you would be increasing the amount of load and speed that you'd place your intervention on that involved extremity. So again, you can see how understanding the meniscal repair helps understand what the precautions are for your interventions, and therefore you can still understand and work within those parameters to intervene or create a therapeutic intervention for that patient. So therefore, someone with a meniscal repair, you do lots of quadricep strengthening, you do gastrocnemius strengthening, again, all in a straight, I mean, you'd be careful on some of the gastroc stuff. It'd be submaximal, it'd be in a straight leg, non-weight bearing position. You do uninvolved extremity or well leg exercises. But again, it's all because you understand the precaution and the nature of the illness or injury that you're addressing as a physical therapist. All right, so moving on about this person's score. So the intervention section needs a little bit of help. Come up here, cardiovascular and neuro. So if you combine these two together, you'll see that the interventions in cardio and neuro would require the most effort for the next attempt. And then coming down here, kind of across the board, by the time they got to the 5th section, they really finally caught their stride or started to do really well. So therefore, that 5th section was pretty good, but that 1st and the 4th section were particularly poor. And again, part of that can be just from losing concentration, having difficulty focusing, test fatigue, certainly part of it. And it's just tough. When you're taking that exam for so long, you're focused for so long, it is hard to stay focused that long. So therefore, the mini mental break. Mini mental break to at least rest your eyes, give them a break just for a few moments, and take a couple of deep breaths. All right, so this person, 593, this is getting really close. I mean, you sneeze right, and you'll make it over the top with a 593. The retake range, obviously showing that if they were to sit down and take the same or a different form of the exam on the same day, they could potentially have been over the top. So again, very, very close to passing. And so these are the ones that are the hardest, just because you know you're so close, you know the content, but you're just a few questions shy. Like they got 133 correct on this one. Really only needed a couple more questions correct. So if you look here, the PT examination section was the worst, but none of these are particularly terrible. And if you look at the sections, again, none of them are particularly terrible. So my advice in cases like this, where they have a score that is very close to the passing mark, is that if they can just bump up their knowledge by 5 questions in each of the big systems, that gives them way more than enough to get over the top. So therefore, my big suggestion is to spend time in the big 3 systems. Don't forget any of the good stuff you already know, and then dive into those big 3 systems and attack those and add a few more questions correct in each of those sections. All right, so let's talk just very briefly about the PTA exam. So you can see the PTA exam is Very similar as far as the performance feedback report goes. I still have to get 600 out of 800. This person had a 593, again, very, very close. And it's the same advice here that on their exam that they really, I mean, other systems was certainly a little bit worse than the others, but not terrible. And they're only a few questions away from passing. So therefore, getting the cardiovascular, musculo, neuro bumped up even a little bit more takes them right over the top. So there you go. There are a bunch of performance feedback reports. Let's see. I want to make sure. I had a bunch of these. I get people all the time who are asking me to take a look at their performance feedback report. Just want to see if there's any other good one I wanted to show you guys. All right, so if we come to this one, this is just an example of, let's see, no, this one. Let's see. Yeah, just the same thing, that they're really close across the mark of 598. It's just such a frustrating score to get. 598 it puts you right at the mark. I mean, really, if you sneezed or coughed, you would make it right over the top. And it comes back to just bumping up your knowledge in each system just a little bit and maintaining what you have so you don't forget all that good stuff. All right, so just to conclude here, as far as the next week, I'm going to talk about some specific study strategies to help you really supercharge your studies. Plus, there's a free course you can sign up for at ptfinalexam.com. Just on the main page, you can see sign up for our free supercharge course. No obligation, just sign up and get the free stuff from us. As far as the content area, make sure that you understand the core principles, especially in those big three. Make sure to be able to understand the why behind things. If you can understand the why behind all of the interventions and the examination, evaluation, differential diagnosis, if you understand the why, that'll prepare you very well for exam day. The other thing is to study proportionally. Hit those big three. You need to spend lots of time in those big three, musculo, cardio, and neuro, so that you're well prepared for exam day. Sections 1, 3, and 5 are common problematic sections, and so my big suggestion here is just to take mini mental breaks where you give your eyes a break, take 3 deep breaths in, and then focus in on the questions again. Because if you find yourself, and this happens to everybody, you get anxiety, you get in there and you're seeing the question, and you start to go cross-eyed, get a little double vision, you're having to reread the word 7 times just to get it to even soak in. Take a little break, and again, this is little. You can't take a 15-minute break there at the desk. Take a little break, rest your eyes for a minute, take 3 deep breaths, and then dive back in, and you'll be great. Let's see, should you buy the performance feedback report? So let's see. So, Mohammed, I think you're asking this question. Should you buy the performance feedback report? So for those of you who have taken it, if your score is close to the passing mark, and usually I'm talking 580s, 590s, if it's really close there to the passing mark, the performance feedback report will tell you that you were close in about everything. I've found that most students are pretty good at self-diagnosing any problems or problematic areas they have. So therefore, if you're really close to that passing mark, I generally say it's not worth the money to go and buy the performance feedback report. You have enough on your plate as far as things to purchase. Taking the exam again, it's just tough. So I only suggest buying it if you're significantly far away. So if we're talking 570s and below or 580 and below, that's where the performance feedback report may give you a little bit of an insight into your performance. However, again, I want to point out that most people are really good at self-diagnosing, and so what'll happen is that they'll tell me and say, hey, yeah, I feel like I didn't do very well on the test, or I didn't pass the test. I felt like cardio was my worst section. Should I buy the performance feedback report? And they decide to do it. They buy the performance feedback report, and sure enough, they say, oh, yep, it was cardio that was the worst. It just confirms what they already knew. So therefore, if you don't have any idea of what sections were weak for you, that's when that performance feedback report is really helpful. But again, if you're close or if you're good at self-diagnosing, probably not worth the money. Just spend your time in those big three systems and bump up. Yeah, you certainly don't have to get the performance feedback report. It's just an option if you're not sure what area you need to bump up. All right, so what questions do you guys have? What questions are out there? So just so you know, we're starting up our live course. I already talked about this. It's not starting November 17th. It's starting, I should have updated those. We're starting on May 13th. So if you guys want to sign up, we're starting on May 13th, which is a Monday, and we'll go all the way up until exam day in July. We've got it for $299. You can head over there to PT Final Exam and get it checked out. Let's see, Jennifer, how's your live course different from the Final Frontier? Ooh, good question. So Bhupinder was actually in my classes a couple of years ago, so I don't know if he mentions that anymore, but he took my class a couple of years ago, was able to finally pass the exam, which was great. So I guess I could say I taught him everything he knows. Certainly a great guy. So half the cost, we have a practice test, we have a study guide, we have non-systems modules, integumentary, what else do I want to say? Lymphatic modules, got access to coaches, Facebook group. I mean, really, it's more content at less price. So that's I'd say those are the two biggest differences. Sophia, does it require to have a DPT before taking the NPT? So great question. So for foreign trained applicants, you have to have an equivalent education to the DPT or similar in the wherever it is that you got your training. So you have to go through an accreditation process, and that's something to contact your state about. An accreditation process which essentially is evaluating your education wherever it is that you got your education. They're evaluating it to see what needs to be done. Like, for instance, we have one of the guys who works with us. His name is Mark. He was a graduate over at in the UK, and he had to take, I can't remember. I think he had to take 6 credit hours or 8 credit hours of some core science material in order to bump up his education to what would be considered equivalent in order to sit for the test. So it really depends. A lot of it depends. Let's see, Mac, I can't order the PEAT though. It says I have an active PEAT. What does that mean? Ooh, good question. I wonder if you've already purchased it, perhaps it's still active in your account. Great question. Not entirely sure. See, Brittany, I got a 570. You've not gotten the performance feedback report. Again, Brittany, it's not required, certainly not required, and it's extra cost to get it. The only time I tell people to really get that performance feedback report is if they're just unsure, totally unsure of what areas need help. And usually, most people, again, are really good at self-diagnosing, say, yeah, I really struggled with questions about, fill in the blank. So therefore, that is an indicator of where you should be focusing your studies, plus bumping up those big 3 is usually plenty to get over the top. Let's see, Brittany, do you have something where we could send you a score report of ours to have you help us understand where we need to focus individually? Right. So, Brittany, I do that all the time for members of the course, so certainly you're welcome to send it over. I can definitely help out there. Let's see. Anaruma, you'll also get personalized guidance with PT Final Exam because we're awesome that way. How often does the FSBP update their PEAT? Oh, good question. So they updated the PEAT at the end of or the beginning of 2018, so a little over a year ago, and they're not planning another update to the PEAT until 2020, so about another year from now. Usually those PEATs are up for about 2 years at a time. So if you've already taken the PEAT since January of 2018, it will be, and you purchase it again, it will be the same exams, the same PEAT exams. The only exception to that is that they actually have 2 versions. They have the individual version, or the personal version, or individual version, 2 exams, so 2 PEATs. They also have the academic version that's only for purchase by universities or accredited institutions, and they have another 2 academic PEATs. So if you're still with a school here in the US and you can get them to do the purchase for you, then you can get another 2 additional academic PEATs. Most people don't bother to go through that just because it's kind of a hassle to get it. But it is possible. I've seen people do that where the school buys 2 and then they as an individual buy another 2, so totally possible. Let's see, Nate, does taking the PTA exam count as a try? So for the PTA exam, in 2016, they started this, what's called the 6-time lifetime limit. But you also have the same rule applies for PTAs. And what that means is that you can take up to 6 times the PT exam and another 6 times the PTA exam. So all told, you would potentially have 12 attempts to get through PT and PTA combined. So yeah, the attempt for the PT does not count, and vice versa. The PTA attempt does not count against your PT attempt. Mayuri, is this course useful for taking the PTA exam too? Oh, great question. I'm so glad you asked. So yes, we have tons of PTA students who come through our live course. So I've got two options. The PTAs are invited to join us in the live course, and I'll tell you, the live course is what I call the PT live course, where we talk about things from a PT perspective. But I invite the PTA students to be there, and you can be as anonymous as you like. No one has to know if you're PT or PTA. But we invite the PTAs to come in with us because as the PTAs deepen their understanding, they perform better and better on their exams. So I've had hundreds and hundreds of PTA students come through our live class, and they all categorically say, that was so enlightening. I'm so glad I did that because it really made the PTA test seem easy, just because we dove into all of the core content behind it. That being said, I also have a specific PTA independent course, which has just lots of pre-recorded modules geared specifically for the PTA. So therefore, there's two options for the PTA. You can join in with our live classes, which is certainly welcome to do so, or you can take the PTA independent course, which again is a great way. It's a little less expensive and a great way to go through the content for the PTA exam. Let's see, Sophia, how do we access the live course if we have a different time zone? I'm so glad you asked. So our live lectures, we're going to be holding those on Mondays at, oh dear, my stylus here is doing like paintbrush here. Okay, those are Mondays at 3:30 p.m. Mountain. 3:30, oh dear. Yeah, forget about that. At 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. You can see all this at ptfinalexam.com. But 3:30 p.m. Mountain or 5:30 p.m. Eastern is when they start. And if for some reason you miss any of those lectures, I do record them and post them for later for future reference. Plus, then each week, so what we do is we have a live lecture where we talk about the content, what we're going to go over that week. Then I give you a bevy of resources and some assigned recordings to go through. I call those my core content review sessions, where we go over tons of content. Tons and tons and tons of content, good ways to remember things, mnemonics, practice questions, all of it across the big systems especially. And then we meet back again on Monday at 3:30. So 3:30 p.m. Mountain, 5:30 p.m. Eastern, and you can tune in wherever you are in the world, and certainly welcome to do so. Let's see, Maguthan, certification verification worth it if your score is close to 595. So again, usually if your score is real close to that 600 mark, that performance feedback report is typically not as useful, just because it tells you were close in everything. Certainly, don't let me dissuade you if you really want to buy the performance feedback report. But I've had so many people, and my heart breaks for them because they don't pass the test. They're really close to the mark. They say, oh, well, maybe I'll spend another $90 on the performance feedback report, which they get it. And they discover that they were really close and everything else was fine. They were just really close. And my heart breaks a little bit just because, like, well, I could have told you that. I could have told you were really close in practically everything, and you just need to bump things up a little bit. So typically I suggest that it's not as necessary, but don't let me dissuade you if you'd like to see exactly what's going on, because who knows, it may give you a surprise. It's certainly possible. See, Nancy, is it available for students before registering for the exam? Yes. As I understand it, you don't have to have an active registration for the exam. You just have to have an account in their system. Let's see, Kate, if I'm not taking the NPT until this time next year, would it be beneficial to purchase the PEAT now? And again, once it's updated in 2020? Great question. So they don't announce the PEATs changing. Like, they don't have it specifically announced yet, so I'd hate to tell you to do that now and have it not be changed in time, because it could be the end of 2020 by the time they get it all changed. Again, they don't have a public announcement about the updated PEAT, so I would be hesitant to tell you to do that. However, you can purchase the same PEAT again, and it would just be less for assessment and more for review, which would be a potential option there. See, Patricia, at what time will the CCRs, can we schedule them a little later? We work is kind of early. So Patricia, all those CCRs, those are in pre-recorded format, so you can go and watch them at any time that you'd like. Because I noticed there's been a trend in my class over the last year or so that as people have been attending, really I was getting terrible attendance at my live lectures. And I thought that's funny. Why would that happen? And what it's exactly what you described, Pat, that Patricia, that the everyone's schedule is so varied and busy that it's just easier to watch the recording afterward than it was to try to tune in at exactly the time when we were going. So therefore, I decided I reduced the price significantly, and I also created kind of this hybrid model. And this is what I do for my universities. When I have university contracts, I do exactly this, where I have my main sessions. Those are live, where you can get your questions answered, reach out. We talk about practice questions. We talk about everything. And then I assign out the recordings of those core content review, and you can watch those at your leisure so that it doesn't conflict with any of your work schedules. See, Todd, would getting a temporary job help me prepare for the next exam, or just focusing on studies the best option? You already signed up. So Todd, welcome. Very happy to have you in the class. So my general rule with working is that we tend to have better time management when we're not just studying for 12 hours a day. Because let's be honest, 12 hours a day of studying is extremely hard to do. And what I mean by that is that you get in there, you go into the library, you sit down, and about 30 minutes into it, you get terribly bored. Maybe this is not you. This is what happens to me. So I get in there, I get terribly bored. I check my phone or something. I call my brother, whatever. And before long, 3 hours have passed, but I've only done about 1 hour's worth of studying. So therefore, I typically suggest that having a temporary job, having a volunteer, anything that gets you out and ideally focused on PT, not in a study sense, and then you come back and do 3 or 4 hours of study in the evening or whatever schedule works out, I find you have better and higher priority, higher quality studying when that's the case. So my general advice is that working or volunteering, especially as a PT, if you can work on a temp license or as a PT aide, certainly would be fantastic. Sophia, core content review session, as we're talking about. Yaramar, Arunima, can I send you my performance feedback report to help analyze it? We can do that. Certainly, we can do that as a part of the live course. We can work on that. Martika, are we going to have a calendar of when to watch the recordings before live sessions? Yes. So I try not to micromanage your schedule because everyone's schedule is super different. But I do make weekly schedules where we have our live sessions. Then I give the suggested assignment and suggest the days when you'll get everything done. I have a template calendar that you can use. And again, it's all suggested, and so you have to make it work around your schedule. But yes, we work really hard to make it really fit your schedule because everyone's life is so entirely different from another's that it's hard to make a one size fits all. So we try to be as accommodating as possible. Let's see, Mayuri, for New York State, we can take the PTA 3 attempts and PT 3 attempts, total 6 attempts in a year then. Yes, so in a year, that's an important distinction there. So with the NPTE, either PT or PTA, you can only take 3 in a row before you have to sit out for the 4th attempt. So the exam is given 4 times a year, January, April, July, and October. If you take January, April, and July, and hypothetically you fail all 3 of those, you'd have to sit out for the 4th exam, and you would only be eligible to take it again in January of the next year. So that's what they call the 3 in a row rule, where you can only take the exam 3 times in a row or 3 times in a 12-month period. So, Tarina, do you have a timetable to guide us what to review per day? Yeah, so I've got a template calendar. Again, I try not to micromanage all of your days exactly, just because it's, I think, a bit of a fool's errand, just because, you know, one person, maybe they only have Saturdays and Sundays to study, and someone else only has Monday evenings and Thursday afternoons to study or whatever. So I try to be as flexible as I can, but I do give you a template calendar to follow that is good at understanding what's the next step and kind of keeping it all in perspective. let's see. The schedule you're talking about with what is suggested when it's up on the main page where I registered for the course. Yes, so it's already up there as a suggested calendar schedule, and you can fill that out by week. And I'll talk more about that when we have our first official session on May 13th, which is, by the way, happy May. We're here into May 1st, so exam day in July is coming faster than any of us would like. Sophia, how to best use the site being given at testings, or how to best use the slate. Oh, so Sophia, you're talking about, I've heard a lot of people call it the brain dump. I call it the note card method. Essentially, when you get to the Prometric Testing Center, they give you a blank, it's a dry erase pad where they give you a dry erase marker, or a dry erase pen, and a blank sheet of laminated paper. And so you go in there, and you can jot down some things on that scratch pad, is what they call it. So I suggest people practice what they're going to put on the scratch pad. And what you put on the scratch pad should be things that are maybe difficult for you to remember, or things that you could do easily with a mnemonic. Like you wanted to do a mnemonic for the cranial nerves, or I don't know. There's lots of different options here. But the bottom line is that slate, or that blank dry erase pad, should have things that are commonly forgotten, or the things that you commonly forget. And everyone knows that from the way they study, that there are things that they just wish they could just ingrain into their brain. And I suggest practicing what you'll put on that blank scratch pad when you get to the testing center. Now, remember, you can't bring anything outside in, so you can't bring your own scratch pad, but you can memorize and spend time preparing what you'll put on that scratch pad. So when you get in the testing center, you can hurry, jot it down, and get going. Let's see, Cynthia, as a PT, do you need the approval to take the PTA, or can we just register for the exam? So for the PT and the PTA exams, the registration process is they're very similar to each other, meaning that you have to apply to your state for approval, because they're the ones who ultimately give approval of your education to say that you are eligible to sit for the test. So for the state, like for instance, in my state, if I wanted to take a PTA exam, I would have to submit a license application to the state with my credentials, asking them to approve me to sit for the PTA exam. And it is a separate process than the PT exam, so they don't automatically talk to each other. You have to submit a whole different application for the PTA exam. Okay, let's see. Delaware State, you need to start a separate process, PTA. Right, exactly. So it's a totally separate application process for each of those. Good. So what other questions do you guys have? These are just some, just think, before long you guys will be at this stage where you're getting past. I just got these emails. In fact, most of these I got today. People who are in our class passing the exam. Anyone who's a foreign trained applicant, their pass rates, the global pass rate is somewhere around 40% for the first time attempt. So if you are foreign trained, I would highly recommend taking a review course so that you can buck that trend and get through the exam in as few attempts as possible. Certainly would suggest that. Any other questions? These have been great questions, guys. I really appreciate your participation. And Arunima, always appreciate Arunima helping us out in the chat box. Again, those of you who join the course, you'll get to interact with her a little bit, and we've got some good stuff coming for you. I know there are a bunch of you here who are already registered for our course, and we're really excited to get going for July, because I think this is going to be fantastic. We're going to have even more content. We're putting out content all the time. Working on my exam simulator, which is coming up. I've got a full practice exam that right now is just in PDF version, and we're working on the exam simulator. Again, got developers working on that all the time. See, Kristen, how often do you recommend taking practice exams throughout the next 3 months? Is that included in the schedule? All right, so Kristen, great question. The practice exams, the schedule for specific practice exams is a little bit tricky, just to give a broad recommendation. So the short answer is every 1 to 2 weeks, you should take a practice exam. The long answer is it depends on how many practice exams you have available to you. Some people only have 3 practice exams available. to stretch out over the next 3 months. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. They can't afford it, or they don't want, or they've already taken other practice tests. They've only got 2 or 3 or 4 available to them. So you've got to spread it out in a wise fashion, just where they're equally spaced out. The biggest suggestion I have is that you save a practice test like the PEAT exam for about 3 weeks before test day. And by so doing, that'll give you a good assessment of where you are 3 weeks before test day, but still give you time to remediate or to improve your performance before test day. So typically I suggest that your last practice exam, or one of your last, should be around the 1st of July or July 10th, kind of in that mark. And then between now and July 10th, so we have about 8 weeks or so, 8 or 9 weeks between now and then, to spread out your other exams depending on how many you have. And so, Kristen, I don't have that. I do suggest about once a week to take one, but again, it's totally dependent on a person's situation. So, Daniel, if you get more, or do you get more time for the test if trained in different language? Ooh, great question. Arunima, would you track down the FSBPT test accommodations booklet? So the exam FSBPT, they do allow people to get test accommodations, but you have to apply for it. And a second language, or having English as a second language, or being trained in a different language, doesn't typically count. It usually has to be some other underlying diagnosis like anxiety or learning disability of some kind. But Arunima is going to post the link to the FSBPT's test accommodations booklet or workbook, where you could apply, and it certainly doesn't hurt to apply. I mean, there's nothing wrong with applying for test accommodations, but that's the only way to get extra time, is if you apply successfully, and typically it requires a medical note from a medical provider. See, Catherine, do you recommend us taking a practice exam right off bat? Is that a good idea, or should we wait? I do generally recommend that near the beginning of your studies you take a practice exam, and that could be now or it could be next week. I mean, there's no specific time that you absolutely have to, but near the beginning of your test preparation experience, take a practice exam. That gives you an idea of where you are, and then, like I said, you'll do a bookend where you'll take another practice exam. Obviously, you take some in the middle, but you take one 3 weeks before the test as an indicator of where you are, and one at the beginning of where you started, and then everything else is in the middle. And I'll talk about this next week, but a lot of people, maybe the biggest mistake I see on practice exams is that they'll take a practice exam, get a score, and then take another practice exam like 2 days later and get the same score. The idea is to learn from each attempt, so make sure that when you do take a practice test that you're going through the rationales and the questions in a very detailed way. My favorite way to do it is just to have some note cards available, and so as I come to a question that I got wrong, I'll write down the topic on a note card and then just keep those flashcards. So after I've gone through the whole test, I've got my little stack of flashcards of questions that I missed. Then I can review those really quickly and make sure that I don't miss that topic anymore because I understand it. Let's see, Brian, which study guide should I purchase to supplement this study group? Ooh, great question. So I do provide a study guide as a part of the course. I also provide a practice test, a workbook, and a workbook key. So it's about 1,000 pages of material. I would suggest spending, Score Builders and Therapy Ed are both fantastic. Let's just be honest here. It's like picking your favorite child. I do recommend having access to the core textbooks. Like this is one of my favorites. Obviously, Physical Rehabilitation by O'Sullivan is a fantastic one. McGee or Dutton, both be fantastic. And then the other one that I suggest having access to for the PTA exam is this Differential Diagnosis for Physical Therapists by Goodman. So therefore, if you're spending money, I would suggest having a book like this, because this is just gold for gastrointestinal, genitourinary, neuromuscular, other system. I mean, it's just gold for all that. So Physical Rehabilitation by O'Sullivan and Differential Diagnosis by Goodman. Let's see. See, Masa, if I'm currently enrolled, or I'm currently enrolled in the unlimited independent course, if I want to enroll in the live course, is there a way to upgrade, or I just need to enroll as a new student? Masa, we can certainly help you out with upgrades. Just send me a quick email. You can reply to any of the emails that I sent you. Just admin@ptfinalexam.com. I'll be happy to take a look, and we can certainly do an upgrade for a discounted cost. No problem. Ooh, Nancy, what are the important chapters in those books we need to go through quickly? Great question. Chapters 1 through 35. So all of this in physical rehabilitation, all of it is eligible test material. So that being said, I do suggest, though, that as you go through the practice exams, for the questions that you miss, go back to the source material and make sure you thoroughly understand that concept, and that'll be your best bet in preparing for exam day, is to spend time in the chapters of questions that you're missing. So again, a priority, because I had the classic email, I got this 2 or 3 years ago. I had someone who emailed me and said, hey, Will, I read Physical Rehabilitation by O'Sullivan from page 1, cover to cover, read the whole thing, and I still failed the test. Can you tell me why? And the truth of it is that we absorb very, very little content from just reading it on the page. Rather, we learn more when we're actively engaged in the content. So either with practice questions, which is certainly that's probably number 1 on the list. According to Harvard research, number 1 on the list is practice questions. Number 2 on the list is active workbook style activities, where you're interacting with the content in a relevant and meaningful way, and not just a busy work way. All right, so let's see. Patricia, study guide, PT final exam is really good. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that, Patricia. We try really hard, and it's all in PDF format, so you can search it really easily and find keywords. Super easy. Evie, I want to enroll in your course. Do you have any promo codes right now? Well, I just reduced the price significantly, so that is the promo code for now. You can always check on Facebook, see if there's something going on, but right now there's not any specific promo going on. Like I said, I cut the price in half, so I think it's pretty fantastic promo. Trying to deliver lots of value at the most economical price, and again, you'll see that. I mean, everyone else is charging at least double. There's even someone out there who's charging almost 5 times the amount of what we do. You get half the content, and you don't get the study guide, you don't get the practice exam, you don't get the videos, you don't get anything, and they charge 5 times the amount. So, I mean, bless their hearts. Certainly can be helpful to some. I don't want to take that away, and don't get me wrong. I'm not dogging on anybody, but I just want to say that the PT final exam is awesome. Is the practice exam available for individual purchase? Yeah, so if you go to ptfinalexam.com, head over to the resources tab, click on resources, and you'll be able to see where you can buy the practice exam. Awesome. Well, guys, so this is just I just got this email again today. Or no, this was a couple of days ago. We have very, very commonly, people who take our course have increases of 50 points, 80 points. I even had someone who increased their score 150 points. I mean, the sky's the limit. We want to make sure that we help people get through the exam. There's a reason why we're the #1 rated. We take actual reviews, not just a couple of testimonials. I hope you guys will check it out. Head over to ptfinalexam.com. We'd love to see you all there. And if not, check us out. Oh yeah, be sure to, definitely do this. Go over to Facebook right now and join our group. That's where you can find the best and latest free content all over on Facebook. I really appreciate that if you would, and pass it on to all your friends. Really trying to get the word out. And yeah, thank you so much for participating. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate Arunima helping us out in the chat box today. She's fantastic. I hope you guys join the class so you can get to interact with her a little bit. And yeah, really looking forward to it. So Will Crane fist pumps all around. And please feel free to email me if you do have any questions. And hopefully I'll see it. Watch for the emails next week. I'll be doing another free session, another couple of free sessions. So watch for those. They're going to be fun. I always love doing these, getting questions answered. We'll talk about study habits, study technique. We'll talk about more on the exam. We'll do practice questions, talk about the questions, multiple choice questions. So awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. So have a great evening, guys. Talk to you soon.